Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. Today I want to talk to you about how to fly one of these guys, of course a real one, not a little die-cast model, a Cessna or any other airplane. The controls are probably not what you would think if you have only had experience driving, if you've never flown before, or even if you've just flown once or twice on a discovery flight or something. The controls of an airplane are significantly different than the controls in a car, although there are analogies, of course, to an automobile, and I'll talk about those first. But if you have never flown, if you're interested in flying, or if you just started to fly, let me, as someone who as recently as a couple of months ago had never flown a plane either, tell you how the controls in an airplane work and how you should think about using them if you're interested in flying an airplane. Now, one thing I definitely want to tell you is this is just going to be like information for you. There is absolutely no substitute for doing this in person, of course, and for that you need a certified flight instructor. So definitely go look one up and at least take a discovery flight. They're like an hour. They cost not all that much money. A lot of flight schools do it as kind of a loss leader just to see if people are interested. It's just an hour or two of your time. You might as well go check it out and see if you're interested in flying. But before you get there, let's talk about how you actually fly a plane. As I talk about these controls, I'm going to show you some video and some images, both from real cockpits, but also from my simulator setup. It's what I would call a mid-range simulator setup. It was about $360 plus $70 for the price of X-Plane, which is a great simulator. You can also get Microsoft Flight Simulator if you want. But anyway, the Amazon setup is a mid-range one. The yoke is not perfect. It's got a little bit of a dead spot right in the middle, which is a little unfortunate. It makes it harder to control than the real yoke, but that's honestly okay because it means flying an airplane feels a little bit easier than flying the simulator. So that's all to the good. Anyway, if you're interested in that, it's about $360 for the rudder pedal, plus the yoke, plus the controls on the right. The controls on the right are more of a push up and down rather than the push the knobs in and out, but it's the same basic muscle memory, so it all works pretty well. Anyway, if you're interested, I will leave links to all of that in the description. Alrighty, so let's start with something most people are familiar with, an automobile. I've got all the props today. So this is a little baby Tesla here. So in a car, as you might know, you have a steering wheel, which is one control. You can turn it to the right or to the left. You also have a single brake, which works for all four wheels. And you have an accelerator or gas pedal, which allows you to accelerate the vehicle. So you can accelerate the vehicle, in other words, make it go faster. You can take your foot off the accelerator, and then the car will likely go slower unless you're going down a big hill or something like that. And then, of course, you can press the brakes to make the car slow down. And then the final control is that you can turn the wheel to make the car go left and right. So those are the controls you have over an automobile. You have three controls basically. So how many controls can this little Cessna 172 Skyhawk have? And by the way, this is probably the plane that you will learn to fly in if you're doing flight lessons and things. You might fly a Piper Cub or something like that, but the Cessna 172 is by far the most common training airplane. It is a high wing airplane, as you can tell, because the wings are up here on top with struts that come down and tricycle gear underneath it. So anyway, how many controls are on this plane? So we had 3 for the car. How many do we have? Guesses? 4, 5, 6? No, we have 10 controls for this airplane. And this is not even a complex airplane. If you have a more complex airplane, you can get 12 or 14 or 15. You can go on and on and on. But even for a simple airplane like this, you have 10 controls. And the really crazy part is that a lot of them affect the other controls. So it's not like you just do one thing and it doesn't have an effect on the other stuff. This is where the complexity of flying comes in. You have many more controls and they interact with each other in really interesting ways. So what are the controls? I'm going to hold up this little sporty Cessna 172 cockpit poster. By the way, you can get this for the cost of shipping from Sporties. Highly recommend it. I just finished taking their ground school with them, and they're a fantastic way to learn the ground school and information that you need to know, along with a lot of YouTube videos and stuff. Anyway, not sponsored by them. I just enjoy their stuff, and so I thought I'd show you. But anyway, you can open this up. This is obviously something you fold out, and it's full size, so you can actually look at it, but I'm just going to show you this because otherwise it would take up more than I can even fit in the screen here. But anyway, you obviously have what's called a yoke here, which is the control. This, however, does not control the direction of travel of the airplane while it's on the ground, which really confused me for sure. If you're someone who's driven for decades, it's going to be really hard to break yourself of the habit that the yoke is the way that you steer the plane. It really isn't the way you steer the plane. Second thing I want to point out is down here, there's a little black button here. This is actually a knob attached to a silver tube that you pull out and in. When you pull it out, it's like taking your foot off the gas pedal. When you push it in, it's like pushing your foot on an accelerator pedal of an automobile. So the best way to think about it, the way that I like to think about it, is when you push in, it's like pushing your foot down on the gas pedal. You push in the throttle knob, and when you want to take your foot off of that, you pull back with it. Next up, of course, are the rudder pedals, which have multiple functions. They're two pedals that seem like the gas pedal and the brake pedal of your automobile, but they function very differently. They do act as brakes, but they're independent independent brakes, so you have to push each brake independently. And if you push the right brake harder than the left brake, then the airplane will actually spin to the right because the right wheel is getting braked while the left wheel is not. If you push the left brake harder than the right, the airplane will spin to the left, or yaw to the left, as we probably should say. But we're talking about on the ground here. So while you're taxiing, those brakes have a lot of effect. And the weird thing as a driver is that you don't just push one brake pedal and the whole vehicle comes to a stop. The airplane comes to a stop. It actually has directional control. And if you fly something like a Van's RV-10 or RV-12, which I had the privilege of doing, then it's really weird because you actually don't have a caster on the front, and the caster actually lets you turn it. So the rudder pedals, in addition to the brakes, you can push it like this. If you push down on the tips of it, then you get brakes. If you push them forward and backward like this, with the Cessna while you're on the ground, as you push the rudder pedals, it actually causes the front wheel to rotate, to the left and to the right. So it allows you to steer. With the Van's RV-12 that I flew, there was no control like that. The front wheel is just like a shopping cart caster. It's just a wheel that's just sitting there. And so what you have to do is you actually have to press the brakes. You have to accelerate the propeller so that it's actually trying to drive itself forward, and then the thing will spin. So if you push the right brake, you'll get the airplane to spin around to the right. If you push the left brake harder, you'll get it to spin the other way. If you take your foot off both, then it goes forward, etc. So while you're taxiing your airplane on the taxiway or on the runway, you can take your hand completely off the yoke, with some exceptions. So I'll get to those later. While you're going very, very slowly, you can take your hand completely off the yoke. So no hands, you're driving completely with your feet. You're using your right and left foot to give directions, and if the plane starts to go too fast, you press the brakes a little bit, but remember you have to press both of them more or less the same. And if the plane starts to veer to the right and you want it to go back, you can push the left brake a little bit harder and make it go back to the left. So you have complete control of the airplane just with your feet and of course with the throttle. So again, you push the throttle in if you want to go a little bit faster, pull it out if you want to go slower. If you're going downhill, you can pretty much have it in idle and it will actually roll downhill, and you'll have to use the brakes once in a while to keep the plane from, going faster. If you're going uphill, you have to give it a little bit of gas by pushing the throttle in, making the propeller spin a little bit faster, and that will pull it up the hill, so it will be able to go up the hill. And so that's basically it while you're on the ground. You're just using your hand on the throttle and your feet on the rudder pedals and the brakes to drive the vehicle. So something my CFI, my certified flight instructor, did was he made me in my left hand hold a piece of paper, not an airplane. And so I used my right hand with the throttle. You always keep your right hand on the throttle. Your left hand is the only thing that's used on the yoke. You never use your right hand on the yoke. So that's very important because your right hand is effectively your right foot as you're driving a car. So you push the throttle in to make it go faster. You pull it out to make it go slower, to make the propeller go slower. But you have to use the brakes because the propeller never comes to a complete stop. At least it better not. If it does, then you've got an engine out situation and something has gone very, very seriously wrong. But anyway, you want to use your right hand always like the gas pedal. So that's like your right foot when you're driving, when you're pushing the accelerator. And then your feet are giving you the directional control. So instead of using the steering wheel, you're using your feet to make the airplane go left and right on the taxiway. And again, you use the brakes by pushing your toes forward on the rudder pedals to apply the brakes to the vehicle to make it slow down and stop. So this is actually a fairly close analogy to an automobile, except you're using your feet. You've got your throttle, so that's one control. You've got your brakes, that's two controls, but it's sort of 2 and 3. And then attached to those brakes is the rudder pedals. So you're also controlling the direction of the airplane with your feet. So you've got 3 controls. You've got the accelerator, you've got the brakes, and you've got the turning, the wheel, but instead of the wheel, it's actually a rudder. All right, so back to our handy dandy chart here. So what about the yoke? Do we finally get to use it when we fly? Yes, we do get to use it when we fly. So when we're in the air, we are going to use the yoke. Also notice that there is a yoke on both sides. There are also rudder pedals and brakes on both sides. So the pilot in command, which is you when you're the student, is always on the left side. The certified flight instructor or the person in the right seat, however, can always take over as well, because there's an equivalent yoke and rudder and brake pedals on the right-hand side as well. So the person in the right-hand seat can always take over. I don't know if you guys are old enough, but if you're old enough, there used to be cars that the student driver teachers had that had at least brake pedals on the right-hand side so that they could slam the brakes on. So kind of the equivalent, the person in the right-hand seat can always go my controls and you can give it over and they can take over and they can fly equivalently as well from the right seat as you can from the left. All right, so talking about the yoke, which can sometimes be substituted for with a stick. With the Van's RV-12 that I flew, it was actually a stick instead, right? So you would hold it and you would move it around like this. With the yoke, it's more like a steering wheel, so you pull it and you turn it. Now, again, you're only using your left hand on the left-hand side. If you were on the right-hand side, you would use your right hand, but you always want your other hand on the throttle because that's the thing that's controlling how fast the propeller is spinning, which is how fast you're going through the air. So very important to keep your right hand on the throttle. Your left hand is on the yoke. There are 2 functions with the yoke. Number 1, you can pull the yoke back, not way up here, but down here, but you can pull the yoke back. That actually doesn't have anything to do with the front of the plane. It actually has to do with the tail surface back here. What happens when you pull the yoke back is that's connected by cables to these little elevators back here, and the elevators pitch up. And what that does is that forces the tail of the airplane down, which forces the nose up. And then of course you climb. And if you push the yoke forward, these elevators actually tip downward, which actually causes the nose to go downward. So you go like this. So your control about going up or down is actually controlled by the tail of the airplane, not by the wings up here. So the elevator control is controlled by the yoke pulling back. That deflects the elevator controls up, and that makes the nose of the airplane go up. If you push the yoke forward, it causes the elevator controls to pitch down, causes the nose of the airplane to go down. At the same time, you can also take the yoke and turn it left and right, which is the thing you probably initially thought you were going to do when you were like driving it on the taxiway. What that does is that causes the ailerons here to deflect, and it causes it when you turn the yoke to the right, it causes the plane to roll about its longitudinal axis to the right, and when you turn the yoke to the left, it causes the plane to roll on its longitudinal axis to the left. Now, if you have a stick, it's the same basic thing. You pull the stick back, causes the elevator surfaces to change, causes the nose to pitch up, push it forward, causes the nose to pitch down, pull the stick to the right, it causes the airplane to bank to the right, pull the stick to the left, it causes it to bank to the left. A little funkiness about the way these ailerons work is that actually when you turn to the right, so when you turn the yoke to the right, that causes the left wing, because the aileron is down, it causes the wing surface to become more rounded, which creates more lift, which actually banks it over to the right. And if you haven't seen my video about lift, you can check it out up here or at the end of the video. So anyway, this creates more lift. So it's kind of opposite of what you might think. When you turn the yoke to the right or move the stick to the right, it actually causes this aileron to go up, and it causes the left aileron to go down. And that causes it to actually pitch over so that the right wing is lower because it's not getting as much lift as the left wing. So we've got control over the pitch of the airplane, and we've got control over the roll of the airplane using the yoke. How do we control the direction of the nose? For that, we use the rudder pedals, just like when we're on the ground. If you push the left rudder in, the plane will turn to the left, because this surface back here on the tail of the airplane will actually tip to the left and will cause the airplane to yaw to the left. This is called a yaw. So we've got roll, we've got pitch, and we've got yaw. So anyway, if you step on the left rudder pedal, you'll actually get the airplane to turn to the left while you're in the air. If you step on the right rudder pedal, it will turn to the right. So between moving the yoke backwards and forwards, turning it left and right, and the rudder pedals left and right, we have control over all three dimensions of the airplane. But one of the funky things about an airplane is that all of these things interact with each other. For example, when you pull the yoke back and pitch the airplane up, you have to feed more power into the airplane, into the propeller, to keep the airplane climbing. If you don't, it will actually lose airspeed, at least if you pitch up too far, of course. And then the opposite is true. If you pitch the airplane down, you have to reduce power unless you want the airplane to gain a ton of speed. So those two things, the throttle and the angle of climb, are completely connected to each other. But even funkier is if you turn the airplane to the left, if you bank it to the left like this, you will get adverse yaw. The tail will actually begin to slide in like this because the airplane is banked, because you're changing the lift characteristics and the drag and everything. So if you don't move this tail surface, the airplane will actually become uncoordinated and start flying like this, which is actually quite dangerous because you can actually stall the airplane. It's also just a weird feeling. So basically you have to use the rudder at the same time that you're doing a turn. When you come out of the turn, you have to use opposite rudder as you come out of the turn. If you go to the other side, you use the rudder with that as well. And then as you come out, basically whichever direction you're turning, you're using the rudder at the same time to offset what's called adverse yaw. Alrighty, so that's 6 controls so far. We've got the throttle/accelerator, we've got the left brakes, we've got the right brakes, we've got the rudder left and right, we've got the aileron left and right, and we've got the elevator. So that's 6. I said there were 10. So there's 4 more controls that you can use. So the first of these 4 other controls is what's called the elevator trim, and that lives on this horizontal tail in the back. There's a little section of it that can kind of be rotated up and down using a wheel down below the dashboard called the elevator trim. And basically what you can do is you can trim it up. If the airplane is flying like this and that's too low for you and you're having to fight it by pulling the yoke back all the time, you can use the elevator trim to cause the airplane to come to a neutral position so that you don't have to keep, white knuckling the yoke all the time and holding onto it so hard. This is something that I'm very, very guilty of as a new flyer. I tend to try to white knuckle it and just muscle the yoke all the time. And my CFI is constantly going like, trim it, trim it, trim it, right? Because every time you change the power, every time you change the angle of attack, even when you get higher up in the air or when you use flaps, which I'm going to talk about next, you have to change the trim at the same same time. So again, it's a wheel, you can crank it up and down. And speaking of flaps, the inner part of these wings, the outer part is what is called the ailerons. That's what deflects up and down when you turn the yoke back and forth. The flaps, on the other hand, are something that comes down, mostly when you want to land on these smaller airplanes. So what this does is the flaps come down, they're more towards the center, and you have generally 3 or 4 positions you can put the flaps in: 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees. 40 is usually the max. And what that does is it causes the wings to have a lot more lift and a lot more drag, which allows you to bank the airplane over more steeply without gaining speed. And that allows you to descend and land safely, because you don't want to land at like a crazy high speed. You want to get over the runway at like 55 or 60 knots and then round out and do your flare and slow down even more. But the flaps allow you to do that. If you don't have the flaps, you might have to come in at something like 70 knots or even more than that. And that will cause you to go much, much further down the runway, carry a lot more energy into the landing. So the flaps are mostly in a Cessna used for landings. They're not so much used for takeoffs or anything. Although with larger airplanes like a 737 or something, you often do want to put the flaps down as you're taking off because you need more lift right at the beginning. Anyway, for a small plane like this, they're mostly used for landings, but they are very, very important because what they do is they allow you to tip the airplane down more. You can fly it at a steeper glide path, like 3 degrees coming down to the runway without gaining a ton of speed. And that allows you to land with relatively low energy and relatively high margins, because a 3-degree slope is actually pretty nice. You don't want to come in at like a 1-degree slope. You might hit a tree. You might come up a little short on the runway. You might carry too much speed into the runway. So flaps are super useful to reduce the amount of speed in the airplane and allow you to fly it at a steeper angle of descent. All right, so that's all the controls that directly affect the way the airplane actually maneuvers in the air, but there are 2 other controls. They are the mixture and the carburetor heat. So both the mixture and the carburetor heat are because these airplanes are probably older than you as one of the people watching this show. If you're under 50 years old, more than likely the airplanes were built in the 50s or 60s. I'm flying a couple of vintage 1975, 76 Cessna 172s for my training, so they're quite old airplanes, and they use old carburetor engines. They don't use fuel injection or anything. And if you are as old as me, you might remember if you wanted to take your car up to a high elevation like Pikes Peak, you'd actually have to have the air-fuel mixture changed by the service station at the bottom of the mountain before you went up, so you could lean out the amount of fuel, in other words, reduce the amount of fuel that was coming into the carbureted engine before you went up to a high altitude like 10 or 15,000 feet. So it's the same thing with these airplanes, except of course they're going up to 3, 5, 6, 7,000 feet all the time, because that's what you fly at. So basically right by the throttle control, which is this black control here, you can see that there's a red control as well, and that's the mixture control. So what you do is by pushing it in, it's full rich, so that means it's got the proper amount of fuel and air mix when you're near sea level. Like my airport is 800 feet, Ben Epps Airport is 800 feet. That's perfectly fine. Anything below 3,000 feet above sea level, you would just do full rich. But as you get up higher and higher, you can move that back a little bit to lean out the mixture to allow the engine to run more efficiently at high altitude, which is great for the efficiency of the engine and for getting better gas mileage and things like that. And then finally, there is carburetor heat, and I don't see that on this one. This may be a newer model that has fuel injection, but on the older ones that have carburetor heat, it's another knob that you can pull out. Carburetor heat redirects some of the exhaust gas, some of the hot gas that's coming off the engine back into the carburetor to keep it from icing. So icing in a carbureted engine is extremely dangerous. If you get ice in the carbureted engine, it could cause it to just not work. It freezes up and the airflow can get disrupted and all kinds of bad things can happen. So carburetor heat is very important before you ever reduce the engine throttle below cruising speed. So the cruising RPM on the Cessna 172 that I am flying is 2,400 RPMs. If you're gonna go below that, you actually want to pull the carburetor heat on first. What you'll notice is that engine performance drops by about 50 RPMs just because you're redirecting that heat back into the engine. You want cold air in the engine because it makes it more efficient, but if you don't want to ice the engine, you want to put some carb heat in it. So basically you pull the carb heat on, you lose about 50 RPMs already, and then you can back off the throttle to whatever you want. When you're coming in for a landing, you obviously want the propeller running at a very slow speed, and so therefore the carburetor heat has to come on because you could easily ice the engine while you're coming in for a landing. You could cause the engine to stall. You really don't want to be coming in, having a one-shot dead stick landing, trying to make it and not having any ability to go around if you need to. So whenever you reduce the throttle, you turn the carb heat on first. When you increase the throttle up to cruise and beyond, then you turn the carburetor heat off. All right, here's a quick walk around so you can see things. We've got the elevator here, which is free. The elevator trim is this guy. It's slightly up right now. This is the vertical stabilizer slash rudder, which allows you to control the yaw of the airplane. Inside here are the flaps here, and then here are the ailerons, which move. So as I move this one, the other one moves in the opposite direction of that. And then of course you've got the propeller and the engine and things like that. As far as the inside is concerned, here is the yoke, which allows you to turn it right and left in the air, bank it right and left in the air, pull back, push forward in terms of the elevator control. And then you've got the rudders. The toes are for braking, and the main rudder control is for actually changing the vertical stabilizer position in the air. Then you've got your trim selector, so you can roll it. Actually, I know that takeoff, it's a little bit above the mark. The E is actually a good spot for takeoff climb out speed. You've got the carburetor heat here, which can come on and off. You've got the throttle, which moves in and out, so you can see it's just a tube. And then you've got the fuel mixture, which you can set to full lean right now to cut the engine off. Push this in, and then you can push it all the way in to make it full rich for takeoff and everything. So that's the basics. Then of course you've got what's called the 6-pack up here, even though it's actually more like an 8-pack. But you got that. You've got your GPS receiver and everything. You've got your radio controls. There's a lot of other stuff here. You've got your headsets and everything. Got your seats. Got your back seats. Got your baggage. So that's the Cessna 172 for you. Alrighty, folks. So those are the basic 10 controls. Don't forget that you can go to Sporty's and you can get this for the price of shipping. I will leave a link to this. I'll also leave a link to my simulator setup on Amazon, so you can go grab it if you want. I have found it to be very invaluable, even though it doesn't translate perfectly from the simulator to the actual airplane. It's really, really good practice. I get the sort of visual cues. I get to go through the sequence of taking off and landing and all that stuff. And believe me, the first couple times I just immediately crashed. I went off the runway and crashed. So it's a learning experience, even in the simulator. I highly recommend getting a simulator, because for the price of about an hour or two of being with your CFI in a real airplane, you can get the whole simulator set up and you can fly it as many times as you want, no matter what the weather is like outside, or even if it's the middle of the night or something like that. All right, so those are the controls. Let me know if you have any other questions about specifics about how they work. There's a lot more details, of course, than just the basics of how the flight controls work. And if you have questions about those, I am happy to do individual videos about that. I'm also going to do another retrospective video as soon as I have finished my ground school written exam, which hopefully I will pass, and my solo, which hopefully I will pass as well. Once I do that, I'm going to do another retrospective. If you didn't catch the first one, you can catch it right here or at the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video, please do like it, because it helps other people to find it. And if you want to see more of this kind of content, consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.